The Time Machine, 1960, wasn't just another science fiction adventure. It was a passion project that took George Pal 15 years to get made. The studio slashed the budget so drastically, he built props from junkyard scraps.
This movie, very quickly, was a violent movie.
Rod Taylor nearly died filming the underground sequences, and the ending they released wasn't the ending H.G. Wells wanted. These are 16 facts about the film that traveled through time on a shoestring budget. George Pal spent 15 years. Trying to make the film producer-director, George Pal acquired rights to H.G. Wells' The Time Machine in 1945. He spent the next 15 years trying to convince studios to finance it. Every major studio rejected the project repeatedly. They considered Victorian time travel stories unmarketable to modern audiences. Pal refused to give up. He'd personally loved Wells's novel since childhood and believed it could work as cinema. He finally convinced MGM to greenlight the project in 1959, but only with severe budget restrictions. The studio allocated $800,000, modest even for 1960. Pal accepted because he knew this might be his only chance. His decade and a half of persistence paid off when the film became a surprise hit. The long development period allowed Pal to refine his vision thoroughly. He knew exactly what he wanted to create. Rod Taylor was cast after James Mason rejected the role. MGM originally wanted James Mason to play H. George Wells, the time traveler. Mason read the script and rejected it, calling time travel juvenile nonsense beneath serious actors. The studio approached several other established stars who similarly declined. They viewed science fiction as B-movie material that would damage their reputations. George Pal suggested Rod Taylor, a relatively unknown Australian actor. MGM executives were skeptical about casting someone without major name recognition. Pal argued that Taylor's everyman quality would make the fantastic story more believable. The studio reluctantly agreed, primarily because Taylor worked cheaply. Taylor's casting proved inspired. The Time Machine prop was built from salvaged junkyard parts. Budget constraints forced production designer William Ferrari to build the iconic time machine from scavenged materials. He visited Los Angeles area junkyards collecting brass fixtures, clock parts, automotive components, and Victorian-era metalwork. The machine's control panel used actual antique barometer parts. The spinning disc came from an old industrial lathe. Red velvet upholstery was salvaged from a demolished theater. The crystalline rods were chandelier pieces. Ferrari spent approximately $5,000 on materials that looked like they cost $50,000. His ingenuity created one of cinema's most recognizable science fiction props on a minimal budget. The Time Machine's steampunk aesthetic, decades before that term existed, came entirely from necessity rather than design philosophy. Rod Taylor nearly died from carbon monoxide poisoning in the Morlock Caverns. The underground Morlock sequences were filmed in confined soundstage caves with poor ventilation. Special effects technician Gene Warren used smoke machines and dry ice continuously to create atmosphere. The combination of theatrical smoke, dry ice fog, and limited air circulation created dangerous carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide buildup. He was rushed to the hospital with carbon monoxide poisoning. Doctors said another 30 minutes of exposure could have caused permanent brain damage or death. Production shut down for a week while safety inspectors examined the set. Additional ventilation was installed before filming resumed. Taylor recovered fully, but remained cautious about the cave sequences. George Pal felt terrible about the near tragedy and personally monitored air quality thereafter. The time-lapse sequences required over 6 months of frame-by-frame photography. The famous time-lapse sequences showing centuries passing in seconds were extraordinarily labor-intensive. Stop-motion animator Gene Warren and his team photographed individual frames over 6 months. Each second of finished film required 24 separate exposures. The sequences showing the sun and moon racing across the sky, flowers blooming instantly, and mannequins changing outfits took weeks each. Warren built miniature sets with movable elements that could be adjusted between frames. The department store window sequence alone required over 2,000 individual adjustments. The team worked in complete darkness, illuminating sets only during actual exposures to prevent light leaks. The painstaking process consumed nearly half the film's total production schedule. Yvette Mimieux was only 16 years old. During filming, Yvette Mimieux played Weena, the childlike Eloi woman who becomes the time traveler's love interest. She was 16 years old during production, though the film presented her as an adult. MGM deliberately obscured her age in promotional materials, fearing audiences would find the romantic subplot inappropriate. California child labor laws required Mimieux receive on-set education and limited working hours. This created scheduling difficulties that production tried to hide. Rod Taylor was 29, nearly twice Mimieux's age. Their scenes together required careful choreography to avoid anything too physically intimate. George Pal later admitted discomfort with the age difference, but defended it by noting Weena's character was intentionally innocent and childlike. The Morlocks were played by uncredited stunt performers who suffered heat exhaustion. The Morlock costumes were heavy latex suits with limited visibility and zero ventilation. Stunt performers inside them could only work 15 to 20 minutes before requiring removal. The suits weighed approximately 35 pounds and trapped body heat dangerously. Studio lights raised interior temperatures above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Multiple stunt performers were hospitalized during production for heat-related illness. George Pal tried to improve conditions by installing small fans inside the suits, but they provided minimal relief. The Morlocks' distinctive blue skin was created with makeup that caused severe allergic reactions in some performers. Several quit after a few days, requiring constant replacement. The stunt performers received no screen credit despite the dangerous working conditions. Their suffering created the film's most memorable monsters. H.G. Wells. Wells' son condemned the film for betraying his father's socialist message. H.G. Wells died in 1946, 14 years before the film's release. His son, G.P. Wells, watched the completed film and publicly condemned it. He argued that George Pal had completely missed his father's socialist critique of class division. Wells' novel depicted the Eloi as degenerate upper class and Morlocks as exploited workers who eventually rebel. The political subtext was eliminated entirely. G.P. Wells called the adaptation Hollywood pablum that neutered my father's warning about class warfare. He refused to endorse the film publicly. George Pal defended his choices, arguing that overt political messages wouldn't work in Cold War America. The controversy highlighted tensions between literary faithfulness and commercial filmmaking. Critics remain divided on whether Pal betrayed or simply updated Wells' vision. If you're enjoying these behind-the-scenes secrets about classic science fiction cinema, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our next deep dive. We've got more shocking production disasters coming soon. Now back to the time machine's journey. The nuclear war sequence used stock footage from actual atomic tests. The apocalyptic nuclear war sequence showing London's destruction incorporated actual US government atomic test footage. George Pal obtained declassified film from the Atomic Energy Commission showing nuclear detonations at Nevada test site. He combined this with miniature buildings and matte paintings of London landmarks. The realistic destruction came from genuine nuclear explosions. The AEC approved the footage use because they believed it served educational purposes about atomic weapons power. Some government officials later regretted this decision when they saw how terrifying the sequence appeared. The film's depiction of nuclear apocalypse traumatized some viewers, particularly children. Parent groups complained that the sequence was too realistic and frightening. The film's Oscar win was controversial because George Pal did most effects. Work the Time Machine won the 1961 Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. Gene Warren accepted the Oscar as special effects supervisor. However, George Pal had personally designed and executed substantial portions of the effects work without official credit. Academy rules at that time prevented directors from receiving effects Oscars for their own films. Pal was technically the producer-director, making him ineligible. Gene Warren later acknowledged that Pal deserved equal or greater credit for the effects achievement. Warren called the situation unfair, but accepted the Oscar anyway. Some industry observers considered it dishonest that Pal couldn't receive recognition for work he'd actually performed. The Academy eventually changed rules to allow director-producers to receive effects credits. But the change came too late for Pal. His substantial contribution to the film's effects went officially unrecognized. The department store mannequin sequence almost got cut for budget reasons. The iconic sequence showing mannequins changing outfits as decades pass was nearly eliminated. MGM executives considered it frivolous and wanted to cut it to save money. The sequence required purchasing or renting dozens of period costumes spanning 80 years of fashion history. The costume budget alone exceeded $15,000. George Pal fought desperately to keep it, arguing the sequence demonstrated time passage more effectively than any dialogue could. He offered to reduce costs elsewhere to preserve it. Pal personally supervised costume selection to ensure historical accuracy. The compromise was filming the sequence in a single day rather than the planned 3 days. The rushed schedule created pressure, but the sequence survived. It became one of the film's most remembered moments. Sebastian Cabot was fired and replaced mid-production. Sebastian Cabot was originally cast as Dr. Hillier, one of Wells's dinner guests. After 3 days of filming, George Pal fired him for excessive drinking on set. Cabot arrived intoxicated for the second day of shooting and couldn't remember his lines. Pal had zero tolerance for unprofessional behavior given the tight budget and schedule. Cabot was replaced by Tom Helmore, who reshot all his scenes. The firing cost production several $1,000s and 3 days of lost time. Cabot's dismissal was kept quiet to avoid negative publicity. He later apologized to Pal and admitted his alcohol problem had destroyed multiple career opportunities. The incident demonstrated Pal's willingness to make difficult decisions to protect the production. The film's British premiere was delayed 6 months due to censorship disputes. The British Board of Film Censors initially refused to grant the Time Machine an A certificate, which would allow children accompanied by adults. The board objected to violence in the Morlock sequences and frightening imagery, inappropriate for young viewers. MGM fought the decision because family audiences were essential to profitability. The studio argued the violence was mild and justified by the story. The censorship board demanded cuts to several scenes, including Morlocks attacking Weena. MGM refused. The dispute delayed British release from August 1960 to February 1961. Eventually, a compromise was reached with minor edits. The controversy generated publicity that helped British box office significantly. Rod Taylor kept the miniature time machine as payment for unpaid overtime production, ran significantly over schedule, forcing Rod Taylor to work extensive unpaid overtime. SAG rules at that time had loopholes that studios exploited to avoid overtime compensation. Taylor worked 60 and 70-hour weeks during final production phases without additional pay. When filming wrapped, Taylor was exhausted and angry about the financial exploitation. He demanded compensation from MGM. The studio refused. Taylor noticed the miniature time machine prop sitting in storage. He claimed it as payment for his unpaid overtime. MGM initially objected, but realized a legal fight would cost more than the prop's value. Taylor kept the miniature for decades before eventually selling it to a collector. Alternate ending. George Pal filmed an alternate ending that provided less ambiguity about Wells' fate. In the deleted version, Wells returns to 1895 one final time to retrieve 3 specific books. He says goodbye to his friends and explicitly states he's going back to the future to help the Eloi rebuild civilization. Philby asks which books he's taking. Wells shows them: a medical textbook, an engineering manual, and a history book. The ending made clear Wells intended to stay in the future permanently. MGM test audiences preferred this clearer resolution. However, the studio chose the ambiguous ending where Wells disappears mysteriously, and Philby wonders which books he took. MGM believed mystery created better word-of-mouth discussion. The Time Machine could have been a big-budget spectacle with major stars and lavish production values. Instead, George Pal created a masterpiece from junkyard scraps, dangerous working conditions, and sheer determination. The socialist message was lost, the real ending was cut, and Rod Taylor stole a prop. Some journeys succeed despite impossible odds.